I've seen lots of people shoot and shoot well with bad habits. And so this is something that I've even noticed in my own life. I'll tell you the biggest bad habit that I had to be broken of. Okay, so this is a Glock 23 converted to 9mm. I'm not going to shoot it right now, don't have hearing protection on. But just to give you an idea of one of the bad habits that I developed over years of shooting kind of in isolation. When I got into shooting and actually had money to actually go and get ammo and spend a lot of time out on the range, I was doing it by myself. I was shooting fast and I was shooting a lot, and so I thought that I was doing really well, but I didn't really have anybody to critique what I was doing. And so it wasn't until a few years later when I actually had somebody teaching me how to shoot correctly. I went into that class thinking I knew everything and came out feeling like I knew nothing. One of the things that I was doing wrong was gripping my gun. Okay? Now you can't see how much my forearm is flexed right now, but I am putting all of my power into squeezing the stock of this gun. All right? And that's how I would come out of the holster. I'd come up out of the holster and I'd have this death grip on my gun, and I'd bring my support hand kind of loosely over it, and I would squeeze side to side with that so that I was pretty much crushing my Glock. And if this had not been a Glock, I probably would have crushed whatever gun I had. And I'd drive out to the target with this terrible grip on my gun. Okay, well, the problem with that is when you're squeezing with all of these fingers into that palm, squeezing with that thumb, getting all those muscles nice and tight, it becomes really difficult to move my index finger independently of all the rest of that grip. And so I'd have a tendency to drive my shots low and left because I'm making the gun go off and I'm squeezing and I've got that death grip. But in my mind, that's what I had to do in order to absorb the recoil of the .40 caliber round that I was shooting. And so I learned later, that's not it. And if this is where you're at, if you're saying, well, that's what I do and I shoot great, that's awesome. I was shooting amazing with my death grip. I shoot even better knowing what to do correctly. So the correct way to grip the gun, okay, think about a vise. So rather than trying to put this thing in an all-around 360-degree vise, which is what I'm trying to do with my death grip, all that I really need to do is control this motion of the gun. Okay, the recoil of the gun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my right hand up against the back and I'm going to push out with my right hand. Okay, pushing against the back of the gun as hard as I can. Well, if I do that, eventually I run out of space to push, right? My arm gets extended. Well, if I take my left hand, my support hand, and I bring that on back up in front and I pull back with my left hand, you'll notice that what I've built up here is this isometric tension between my right arm and my left arm, and I can push on that gun as much as I want and it stays right here. And notice my index finger now, because it's my tricep and my bicep pulling it together, all of the muscles in my forearm here, which if I was still in high school biology class I could remind you what they all are, but I'm not. All of those forearm muscles, I can independently move this little finger without having to worry about all of these fingers fighting for control of those muscles. Makes my trigger press a lot smoother, and it definitely helps maintain that recoil. Now, that's worked for me. I've had several other shooters who have come with me to the range, and I watch them shoot, and they take their shot, and the gun kind of flips up like this. And I can tell that they're really squeezing hard on it, but they're putting all of their thought into squeezing the gun and squeezing left to right with their support hand rather than pushing out with their right hand. And so I'll mention it to them, and it's never a good idea to yell at a guy who has a gun. So I'll say, hey, why don't you go ahead and try this out? Instead of squeezing so hard on the gun, what I want you to do is just think about pushing out with your right hand, pulling back with that left hand. Get that good push-pull, see what happens. And it's amazing, their first few shots go from this, where they're almost limp-wristing their Glocks, to just that little bit of motion. With a 9, with a 40, with a 45, doesn't matter. They go from some ridiculous recoil to some very manageable recoil. It gets it going all the way in their forearm rather than on their wrist. They can get back onto their sights faster so they can get shots down target, and their shots in general are just more accurate. So that's my grip. Shooting well, I'm going to push against the back, I'm going to pull against that. Another bad habit that I've seen is that people who have been part of the open stance, weaver stance controversy, they either can't figure out which one they are, or they do one to the extreme. What I'm talking about is the guy who does the open stance, but he crouches almost like he's a catcher. You know, he'll get way down here, and you can't even see me on that one, okay? He'll crouch way down, and he's leaning into the gun really hard, but man, it's a 22. You don't have to lean that far. You don't have to squat your butt almost all the way down to the ground just to hit that. If you're gonna shoot open, shoot open. Little bit of bend in the knees. Go ahead, roll up onto the balls of your feet. Get that gun out in front of you. Go ahead, do that. If you're shooting weaver, don't go extreme on the weaver stance. I'm talking about the guys who stand fully sideways and they've almost got this archery stance, holding their gun out at a 90-degree angle. They got their toes pointed 90 degrees to the line. Don't go so far into the weaver. If you're going to shoot weaver, think about a nice boxer stance. Put your firing side leg about 1 foot back from your support side leg. Rotate so that your feet are about 45 degrees to the firing line, and keep your shoulders nice and flat. Bring that left arm up underneath. Don't chicken wing it. Bring it up nice and underneath, okay? So figure out which one you are. Now, I'm not here to say open stance versus weaver stance. Typically, I shoot a weaver stance because that was how I was trained to shoot. However, in the competition just a couple weeks ago, I was shooting an open stance just because I was seeing all the other competitors do it, and it made sense with where the targets were lined up. We were shooting a rather wide spread, so I decided I'm going to go ahead and adopt an open stance, which meant that I was a little bit unstable over here, and by the time that I got the targets over here, I was in my happy weaver stance again. Okay, not going to tell you which way is right. Try them both out, but don't go to the extremes. Don't get into the bad habit of getting so aggressive in your stance that you're actually making your stance worse. Now, one thing I do want to caution is if you are doing an open or a weaver, lots of shooters, especially shooters who aren't as comfortable with guns or think about a gun as being heavy, they tend to lean back to kind of balance out that gun. Right? If you're leaning back, you're just asking to stumble backwards when that gun goes off. Right? I see it all the time. They're shooting 22s. Maybe it's not the thing you need to work on right then, but if you can encourage them to either stand up straight or even lean into that recoil just a little bit. Doesn't have to be an aggressive lean all the way across the firing line to get that gun under control, but just a little bit of a lean. Just move forward a little bit. Anyway, I'm just a guy having fun at the range. Hope you enjoyed that.